Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols. I have a Christmas card design to share with you today that's easy to mass produce. I'll share a few tips, tricks, and ideas so that when you mass produce your own cards, you'll be ahead of the game. My card design today starts with the Poinsettia and Pine stencil. For the sentiment on my project, I'll be using the On the Block Merry stamp and the coordinating die. I'll also be using the On Repeat Christmas stamp and the coordinating On Repeat die. For ink colors, I'll be using honey, olive, avocado, mulled wine, and cherry pop. I'll be doing some embossing, so I have VersaMark ink white embossing powder and my powder tool. I'll be using my blender brushes with the inks and stencil. I'll be adding a few splatters to my project using chocolate truffle liquid watercolor, sugar cube ink refill, and a water brush. To embellish my card, I'll be using the Bits and Pieces silver drip drops. I'll attach those with multimedia matte and my crystal katana tool. And finally, I'll be using some foam squares and foam sticky strips. I'm starting off with my stencil. I've made a hinge with removable tape and just attach the stencil right to my grid paper. And then I'll place my cardstock pieces right into this guide right on the middle. And I have a little adhesive there to hold everything in place. I'm using my blender brushes to apply the color through the stencil. And I'm going to start off with cherry pop ink to color in the poinsettias. I'll do the whole flower in cherry pop ink. And then you'll see I'll accent the middle with mulled wine. I'm also not going to fill in the entire stencil. I'm only going to apply color through the left side. This is kind of a saving time trick with mass production. You don't have to do the whole stencil. You can just do a portion of it and your project is going to turn out just as beautiful. I'll use avocado and olive on the leaves, and then you'll see I'll go back and add cherry pop ink into the berries, and then finally I'll add honey ink into the little in-between flowers and dots on the design. Once I'm done with my stenciling, I'll lift up the stencil on the hinge and pull my finished stenciled cardstock piece out, and then I'll add the next piece in right onto that guide so everything is lined up exactly the same way. This is another great time saver for when you're mass producing cards, and do all of the same step, like I'm doing all of the stenciling for my cards right now at the same time so that you can just kind of do everything in bulk. You're going to save time and you're going to move quicker doing it that way. I'm doing 4 of the card design that I'm sharing today, and obviously if you're doing more, you would just keep repeating the steps for as many as you are creating. Next, I'm cutting out the Merry with the On the Block Merry die. I'll be cutting this from sugar cube cardstock, so I'll set that up on my Sidekick machine and cut this 4 times for my cards. I'm setting up a template in my MISTI so I can stamp onto the die cut pieces for the Merry sentiment. I'm putting the Merry stamp into the MISTI, closing the lid to pick it up. I will ink up my stamp and stamp it onto the grid paper, and then I've die cut a piece from a scrap piece of cardstock so I can arrange this as a template over the stamped Merry and line it up exactly where I want it to go. Once I have it where I want it to go, I'll tape it in place and I'll add a little adhesive into the opening to hold the die cut pieces in there, and then I'll put the die cut pieces in and I'll ink up my stamp with mulled wine ink and I'll stamp the sentiment onto the die cut pieces. This template is a great way to stamp a bunch of the same thing very quickly and easily. For the next part of my sentiment, I'll be using the On Repeat Christmas stamp. This stamp was made for mass production. It has the word Christmas repeated 8 times, so I'll stamp this 1 time. I'll be embossing the Christmas words with white embossing powder, so I will be using my powder tool and conditioning my cardstock. I'm stamping the Christmas words using VersaMark ink. I'll add the white embossing powder and then use my heat tool to melt that embossing powder on the cardstock. I'm cutting out the Christmas words with the coordinating On Repeat die. It has the innovative alignment guides. Just line those up. I'm using removable tape to hold the die in place, and then I'll send that right through my Sidekick machine 1 time, and that will cut out all 8 Christmas words. I always like adding splatters. This step is completely optional, but if you'd like like to add them. I added a drop of sugar cube ink refill and chocolate truffle liquid watercolor to an acrylic block. Use a wet brush to pick up the color. Tap the brush over your finger to splatter the ink onto your projects. Now that I have everything created for my card design, I'm ready to assemble. First, I'm adding my stenciled background to a mulled wine card base. I'm attaching the piece so that it is lined up at the top and there'll be just a peak of the mulled wine peeking out at the bottom of the card. Next, I'm attaching the Merry word. I'll be popping these up with foam squares. I'll use scissors to snip the squares in half while it's still on the paper backing. That will help your scissors from not getting gummed up. I'll add the foam squares to the back of the Merry and then attach those to the card front. Once all of the Marys are attached, next is the little Christmas words. I'm using the foam sticky strips to attach these. I'll add those right to the back of the little strips of words and then attach that right below the end of the Merry so that it completes the Merry Christmas sentiment. I'm adding some embellishment for a final finishing touch. You definitely don't have to add an embellishment, but I personally love the extra sparkle and shine. I'm using the Bits and Pieces silver drip drops. I will place those scattered around the sentiment. Use my crystal katana tool to help pick and place those jewels as I adhere them to the card with multimedia matte. I hope you enjoyed my video today and maybe you picked up a few tips and tricks to use the next time you are mass producing cards, maybe for this Christmas. You can find the supplies that I used today in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.